Um, I have been noticing over the course of the semester as we've been reading the cycle over and over a pervasive theme of words, verbs, and other exclamations related to the act of sight and seeing, or words that draw attention to see something, to notice something. And I've started writing those down, and this past week I've been doing some searches, comparative searches on the relative amount of times or density of these certain vision related words within the Elijah and Elisha cycle compared with the remainder of First and Second Kings, as well as some other books. And it's been really interesting. So there are three verbs primarily that I've noticed that are being used throughout, and one exclamation. So ra'ah, reish aleph hey, to see, to perceive, to look at. Hine, the exclamation, behold, look, or hear, see, something like that. And then the root nun bait tate, which appears generally in the Hifil, he beat, which means to see. And then the root nun kaf reish, also in the Hifil, hikir or makir, which means to recognize or notice. So those four words appear in the Elijah Elisha cycle almost 9 times per 1,000 words. And the remainder of First and Second Kings, not counting the Elijah Elisha cycle, those four words appear less than 4 times per 1,000 words. So more than twice as often are words related to sight and seeing. If we add a couple of other words that appear a number of times in this particular text, the word ayin for eye or enaim, eyes, and pakach, to open, that's the verb used in 2 Kings 6, his eyes were opened, or their eyes were opened. Then we get 11 per 1,000 words in the Elijah Elisha cycle, but still less than 6 in the remainder of 1st and 2nd Kings. So still twice as often, or more than twice, as 2 times as much, which suggests to me that within the Elijah Elisha cycle in the larger section of First and Second Kings, the prophetic narratives are intended to help not only the people in the stories, like in this story, but particularly these stories are remembered in order to teach the people of Israel and now to teach us how to see the world as it truly is. The world of the prophets was a profoundly sacramental world, a world that in this story is literally aflame with the presence and the power of God. And so I see this story, but also the entire Elijah Elisha cycle set within the larger context of the book of Kings and the narratives about the kings, to be making a contrast, that there is a way in which kings and kingdoms view the world through a particular lens. And that lens has to do with violence and military strength and power speaking to power, but power understood in a very particular way. Through weapons, through military strength, through the strength in numbers, the strength of might, of power in that way. But then the flip side of that, the prophets represent and embody a different perspective on power, a different source of power, and a way that power is distributed in a different way. And so you might call that the way of the King of the Universe, as Tom does in his chapter. So we have the way of kings and kingdoms compared with the way of the King of the Universe, in a sense. And I think in some ways this story is the beating heart of the Elijah Elisha cycle. It encapsulates something that is core or central to the theological affirmation that this whole scope of prophetic narratives is trying to say. So let me try to unpack some of this for you. So the prophet represents and teaches everyone throughout this story how to see the world. And so the motif of blindness and sight, of eyes opening and closing, is used as a way of teaching. So the prophet is the one who inhabits the sacramental worldview, but is surrounded by people who are materialists, who see what is before them. They see the sword, they see the bow, they see the massive army, and that's all that they see. They don't see beyond that. And so Elisha apprentices everyone except the king of Aram, but apprentices all of the characters he comes into contact with in the vision of the king of the universe. Um, so to back up a little bit, there is throughout history a connection between violence and resources, between violence and food or bread or the basic necessities of life. And that connection is actually intrinsic in the Hebrew language. That the word for lechem, the word for food, is lechem, and the word for waging war is nilham. They both have the same root, lamed het mem, lechem, nilham. And Tom Bogart in his essay draws attention to this and suggests that waging war could be understood as securing bread for oneself, for one's people. In our day, perhaps this would be crude oil as opposed to food, although our food system is a matter of national security. And if our food system would be upset in some way, then we would be desperate as a nation, and many countries around the world are, and in part because of our own policies. And so, but for the people of Israel, it was food, lechem and nilham. And you can remember there's a lot of stories, like in the book of Judges, for instance, the Midianites in Gideon, that every time they would plant their food in the crops, the Midianites would come and destroy the crops, stomp on them, and that was a matter of real security threat for the people of Israel. And so God sent Gideon to overcome that threat. But in our story, neither king can imagine a way to secure their border, to secure their food for their people without the use of force. Neither the king of Aram nor of Israel. They don't see a way to food security outside of military dominance over their neighbors. But from the prophet's perspective, they're blinded by their view of power. It's a narrow view of power that's actually blinding them. So the story is told in such a way that it builds over the course of the plot, it builds to its climax, which is the moment in which the king of Israel comes to see the world differently, even if only for a short period of time within the canonical order of the stories. But Elisha wants to, I think, teach what was at the root of Martin Luther King's revelation, encapsulated in the axiom, violence begets violence. This story actually offers a way of ending violence, but not through violence, through hospitality and friendship. The prophetic imagination that Elisha displays in this drama introduces the king of Israel to the ways of the king of the universe, in order to teach him that the way of the king of the universe leads to life. It leads to abundance and flourishing, as opposed to scarcity. That it is rooted in trust and security, as opposed to anxiety and fear. And so the first character in the story that Elisha apprentices is his own apprentice, his own servant, who is flooded with fear So at the moment when the armies come down, they're surrounding the city, and his servant wakes up and says, "Ah, my lord, what can we do?" And I had a new discovery of this moment actually watching Alyssa Mumels' post of her recitation of this first half of the text. And it just demonstrates the power of recitation and embodiment. And I heard in her exchange, in her recitation of this, an echo that I had just not seen before. And I made the translation, but I didn't see it when I made it. And so his servant says, "Ah, my Lord, what can we do?" And Elisha responds, "Do not." And he continues, "Do not be afraid." But I think in that exchange, there's something fundamentally true being expressed. Animated by fear, the prophet's servant wants to do something, wants to control the situation, wants to fix it, wants to set up a barrier, wants to get away, wants to avoid, wants to do something, wants to resolve the conflict, resolve the situation that is a moment of crisis. And when we get into crises, our animal brains can come alive, and we move into this fight, flight, or freeze mode. And those are good instincts, but they're also animated by fear. And I think Elisha's response, "Do not be afraid," is saying more than just "don't be afraid." He's saying don't act out of fear. When our actions in crises are motivated by fear, motivated by anxiety, motivated by scarcity, they often lead to resolutions that actually deepen the crisis, deepen the impact of the crisis on us or on the people that we love, or maybe on people that we don't even know and are blind to. And so I saw that for the first time listening to Alyssa recite it. So thank you, Alyssa, for that. And I think there's something true about that. And I think there's something relevant about that for us in our moment. It's not a prohibition on action. Sometimes action is required. It's not a prohibition, but it's a caution against action motivated by fear. And instead of fear, Elisha empowers his servant to be motivated by faith. And so Elisha does something. He prays for the servant that his eyes would be open, and his eyes are opened. And he teaches his servant to see. He teaches him that there is more to this world than meets the eye. It's literally aflame with the presence and the glory and the goodness and the love and the power of God, manifested by the horses and chariots of fire. And this moment brought to mind a poem from Mary Oliver from her collection Blue Horses, which is titled Angels. And I'll offer it to you here. You might see an angel anytime and anywhere. Of course, you have to open your eyes to a kind of second level, but it's not really hard. The whole business of what's reality and what isn't has never been solved and probably never will be. So I don't care to be too definite about anything. I have a lot of edges called perhaps and almost nothing you can call certainty. For myself, but not for other people. That's a place you just can't get into. Not entirely, anyway, other people's heads. I'll just leave you with this. I don't care how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. It's enough to know that for some people, they exist and that they dance.